Good evening, Fiji, and welcome to For the Record. Now, this evening, we're glad to be joined by the ambassador, or the head of the European Union delegation. 20 years in the country, or in the region, and we're finally glad to meet you, sir, and welcome to For the Record. Mr. Andrew Jacobs, now, a year as the head of the EU. How has it been for you? 1 year?
It's been a fascinating year. I arrived here in February 2013, and since then my feet haven't really touched the ground. Certainly, it's been a very interesting time in Fiji, and the office here is also responsible for relations with 10 other Pacific countries, and also for cooperation with the 4 European overseas countries and territories, so New Caledonia and so on.
So in total about 15 countries.
Exactly. So I've been travelling around the region a lot. I've presented my credentials in 10 out of 11 countries. I still need to go to Niue, where I will go in June. Yes, I've enjoyed very much my first year and a bit here in the Pacific, and I'm looking forward to the next few years.
But of course, you've been with the European Union for quite some time, in fact, 20 years?
Yes.
You've just received an award for that, too.
I did. I received a 20-year medal for long service to the European Union, which I was proud to receive. So yes, it has been a long time. I spent a lot of time working in Brussels, but I was also in Southeast Asia for 8 years, in Thailand and in Vietnam. So some way from the Pacific, but certainly I came with a certain experience of cooperation with Asia.
So experience with Asia, and also a little bit in Africa?
Yeah, my post before I came here was responsible for cooperation with North Africa and the Middle East, what we call the southern neighbourhood of the European Union, and that was a very, very interesting time. This was when the revolution hit Tunisia, then Egypt, and a lot was going on. A lot of hard work to do, but very, very, very interesting.
All right. Well, how would you compare that to your first year here in the Pacific?
Well, certainly the challenges are rather different to those in our southern neighbourhood. But working here on development cooperation issues, on trying to develop, I think, a closer relationship with our Pacific partner countries has been a very interesting challenge. One thing that I'm very keen to do is to try to make sure that we are not just seen as a donor in the Pacific. The European Union is a big provider of development assistance. But I think we're very keen to move on to a more strategic relationship around things like climate change, global security, and so on. And I've been doing a lot of work on that in the last few months.
Now, you speak of that, especially with climate change and what our neighboring countries and also many of the countries here in the Pacific are facing. Now, let's talk about what EU's involvement in that and how it's faring with these projects.
Well, on climate change, I think we work with the Pacific in 2 different ways. First of all, in a strategic partnership. We were very pleased last year that our Commissioner for Climate Action, Connie Hedegaard, took part in the Pacific Island Forum Leaders Meeting in Majuro when the theme was climate change. And she, I think, was able to engage very well with the Pacific leaders on the challenges facing the region. And we share with the Pacific countries a real desire to make sure that in 2015 there are legally binding targets on emissions accepted around the world by all the developed countries in the world. That's something that we're fighting hard for, and something that I know our Pacific partners are equally keen on seeing come into being. And then on the other hand, we're also providing quite a lot of technical assistance, financial support for activities in the Pacific, particularly relating to climate change. And to give a couple of examples, in Tuvalu, we've provided water tanks, I think, to 70% of the population. So they have, let's say, access to clean water when times are difficult, when there is a drought. We've been doing a lot of work also on renewable electricity. Certainly, the Pacific Island countries are not responsible in any way for what has been going on with the climate, but I think it's very important that they show the way forward, that they take the lead in bringing in renewable energy, and by doing so, I think they can show a real commitment to alternative energy sources, to tackling some of the causes of climate change, while at the same time saving a lot of money on fossil fuels. And that's something that we're very proud to have been successful in introducing in a number of Pacific partner countries.
Mm-hmm. Well, apart from climate change, there are others who are also working with the EPA negotiations, especially with the ACP. Now, we'll talk more about this coming up, but say, for instance, are there so far with these work on climate change, for instance, what are the main challenges have been for the EU?
I think one of the main challenges that we have had in the Pacific around our development cooperation is trying to make sure that what we provide in terms of support is sustainable. Mm-hmm. We need to make sure that, for example, if we provide funds for the installation of solar panels, and we're not going to be there forever. We will initiate a project, but then the maintenance is very important. It's the real ownership of the communities that we're working with that we need to ensure, so that we can, I think, provide long-term benefits.
Well, since the EU has been here in the Pacific, a lot of projects have been undertaken and they're supported by the EU. Yeah. What have the EU seen as, with the attitude of Pacific Islanders towards sustaining these projects?
I think we've seen a lot of very positive progress in the last few years. I think it's very rare for us to go and visit a project now that we funded, let's say, 5 years ago, and find that the project hasn't been well maintained. I think there is an increasing recognition among the Pacific partner countries that we work with that they have a responsibility to make sure that what we do really does provide them with the long-term support over the years to come, and that is certainly something that we're pleased with the evolution of.
Okay. On that note, we'll wrap up this segment, but stay with us. There's still more to come with our discussions with the Ambassador, Andrew Jacobs, the head of the European Union delegation in the Pacific. You're back on For the Record, and with us this evening, the head of the delegation of the European Union to the Pacific, Ambassador Andrew Jacobs. Now, Europe Day, normally marked on the 9th of May, Friday. And what is behind Europe Day? What is Europe Day?
Yeah, Europe Day falls on the 9th of May. It's the anniversary of a declaration made by the French Foreign Minister in 1950. He declared that he wanted to see the establishment of what he called the European Coal and Steel Community. This was just a few years after the end of the Second World War. Europe was devastated, and the intention behind the setting up of this community was to pool all coal and steel resources, so that no longer could a European country establish weapons of war without other countries knowing what was going on. And originally there were 6 countries that set up the European Coal and Steel Community: Germany, France, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg and Italy. Mm-hmm. And in 1957 this became the European Economic Community.
Believe it or not, here in Fiji or in the Pacific, many of us primary school students memorize that.
That's impressive. That's impressive.
And remember those countries too. We'll go on.
Yeah, the EEC, the European Economic Community, became the European Community, and more lately the European Union. But still we recall that day in 1950, when this very sort of visionary statement was made by the French Foreign Minister, Mr. Schuman. And since then we have gone from 6 member states to 28. The last country to join was Croatia on the 1st of July last year. There are other countries which are keen to join the European Union. And every year we celebrate the establishment of the Union. We celebrate the close, let's say, alliance among the different European Union countries, and the friendship of the people.
Now, how is Europe Day marked here in the Pacific?
Well, one of the things we're trying to do through Europe Day in the Pacific is to generate a bit more awareness of what the European Union is. As I say, a lot of people think, oh, the European Union is a development partner, is a donor, but we're much more than that. And we want to establish much more of a, let's say, strategic partnership with our partners here. And we also want to make everybody aware, the general public aware of what Europe is. Brussels, I looked it up yesterday, is over 16,000 kilometers away. So physically, we're quite distant.
Yes.
Although I must say that the closest country to Fiji is France. Futuna is Fiji's nearest neighbour.
That is true. We tend to forget that.
Indeed, that is part of Europe. But the continent of Europe is a long way away. But the Pacific is important for us. So anything that we can do to, let's say, make people know the European Union better, we are keen to do. So what we did this year on the 9th of May, we organised activities for children in Suva Library, so drawing, painting competitions. There was a treasure hunt around Suva called the Amazing Race, which again was very successful. And we have had for the first time an exhibition in Suva Museum of EU Pacific cooperation, because we really wanted to show people some of the real activities that we're carrying out in the Pacific. We had on Saturday the 3rd of May there was a beach cleaning exercise which we led over at My Suva, which was great, flying the European flag and also helping to clean up the beach there. So a number of things. We've also organised in Tonga this week. There was a cycle ride around Tonga with civil society organisations and others, again to raise awareness of the European Union.
Now, speaking of which, in Tonga there's also a call for civil society groups and also NGOs for funding from the European. Would you like to talk? This is the first Pacific Island country that you've called for proposals?
No, we have calls for proposals from time to time in different Pacific countries. We've done it in Fiji several times.
I mean, for this year,
this year, I think next year it will be Fiji's turn for a call for proposals, and these are calls for proposals for civil society organisations or for NGOs. We ask them to submit proposals for projects for which they would like funding. Generally, they target activities such as trying to help those who are marginalized in society, to help empowerment of women, activities related to human rights and so on. And last week we were pleased to be able to launch a new call in Tonga. We hope that we're going to get some good response from NGOs there. We already have a number of projects up and running, and we have several projects in Fiji as well, which are the result of previous calls for proposals.
Now, what do you look for, or what does the EU look out for in terms of having these projects approved or to get funding?
Well, normally we will, through a call for proposals, we will target a certain area of support, of cooperation. So it could be, for example, the empowerment of women and children, and then we will be looking at proposals that really can make a difference to people's lives, proposals that show that there is a very serious commitment from the NGO putting in the proposal to successful activities. We have projects ongoing here in Fiji. As I said, we have a very good project with Homes of Hope, for instance, which is working on child labour, sexual exploitation of children. We're very pleased with that. We have a project with the VCC Sai Health Centre, which is working on reproductive health issues in the West. Again, a very successful activity. And there are several projects which relatively small, but they can really make a big difference to people's lives.
Now, one of the also would not say project, but one of our agreements with many of the Pacific Island countries is our economic partnership agreements under the ACP and EU partnership agreements. Now, how has EU looked at our development from now in the Pacific, now with the preferential some of the preferential agreements here for Fiji specifically, looking at October 1st and what we may lose out on. Now, what is the view of the EU?
Well, we are negotiating with the Pacific partner countries, the ACP, we call them African, Caribbean, Pacific, the Pacific ACP countries, an economic partnership agreement. This will give preferential access to the European market for products coming from the Pacific. It's been some time in the negotiation. It's not finished yet. There was, I know, a very positive meeting that took place here in Suva a few weeks ago of the Pacific trade ministers, and we're looking forward to continue the negotiations with them. In the meantime, as far as two of the Pacific countries are concerned, two of the more developed Pacific countries, Papua New Guinea and Fiji, we already signed a few years ago what we called interim EPAs, or interim economic partnership agreements. Fiji hasn't yet ratified the agreement, and we hope that Fiji will do so by the 1st of October this year. Because as of that date, there is I don't want to get into technical details, but there is a regulation which comes to an end, which provides Fiji with preferential market access. And Fiji needs to ratify the interim economic partnership agreement in order to continue to get the benefits of preferential market treatment.
Is there still room for negotiations up until the 1st of October?
We don't need to carry out any more negotiations for the interim economic partnership agreement. The ball is in Fiji's court to move forward and ratify the agreement that was signed some time ago. The negotiations are really for the regional economic partnership agreement, which would come into place after the end of those negotiations and replace the interim partnership. But Fiji is in a good position, having already signed the interim EPA, and now we would urge the government to go forward with the ratification, so that the preferential market access continues after the 1st of October.
On that note, we'll take a short break. We'll be right back on For the Record. Welcome back to For the Record. We're speaking with the head of the delegation of the European Union, Ambassador Andrew Jacobs. Now, let's talk now about elections in Fiji coming up in September. Yeah. What is the view of the European Union? Now, what do you foresee for after, or at least come elections? You've already stated that you would like to have observers at the present during the elections. Would you care to comment on the upcoming
Sure.
elections?
I mean, first of all, I'd like to say that we were extremely pleased when the elections were announced, when the supervisory elections was announced, and so on. And our High Representative for Foreign Policy, Catherine Ashton, made a very clear statement that we welcomed the electoral process, that we were looking forward to the 17th of September. And certainly everything seems to be moving forward well. The mechanics for the election are being put in place. We were pleased to provide technical assistance to the elections office. We had 2 experts working with them, and we're just planning now a program for the training of those who are going to be involved in, let's say, the organization of the election itself, polling station officials and so on. So we're very committed to helping the process towards the elections along. With regard to observers of the elections, we have offered to send in observers. It's not something that it's not a condition of our continued commitment to supporting Fiji, but we do offer to partner countries around the world to send in a European electoral observer mission, which is quite a large-scale operation, to provide a view on how the electoral process went and to provide recommendations on improving the process in the future.
So sort of like an assessment of what's
sort of like an assessment, but a sort of an independent view of how things go. We had an electoral observation mission in Fiji in 2006. We're very pleased that a lot of the recommendations that were made by the team have been taken account of in the preparation of the election now. But one thing that is important for us is that after the elections take place, we are able to lift the restrictions that we have on some types of development cooperation with Fiji. These were suspended in 2007, but once
with
there
the
has been
announcement. Yep.
well, once there's been a return to democracy, once the credible elections have taken place, we should be in a position quickly to raise the restrictions that we have and to provide more development assistance to Fiji.
Well, Australia and New Zealand have already lifted their restrictions. What else are you looking at? I mean, after the elections.
Well, we're looking forward to a full return to democracy with the elections, and we will need to have a look at how the elections went and to make a recommendation to the 28 European Union member states to lift the restrictions which exist.
Why is it so important?
Why is it so important?
Why is it so important that the European Union is involved with the election process here in Fiji?
One thing that the European Union is very keen on doing throughout the world is providing support to countries in transition. We have a great deal of experience in that. A lot of our member states went through transition periods, particularly those countries in Eastern and Central Europe which joined the European Union in 2004. We've just celebrated the 10th anniversary of the Big Bang enlargement. We had 10 new members then. 8 of them are Eastern and Central European countries who went through a process of transition from being from the time that the Soviet Union disappeared. And we have, I think, a lot to offer in terms of support, in terms of advice to countries who are going through transition as well. And so we have been providing technical assistance to Fiji for the electoral process. We're looking forward to engaging fully with the government following the elections. We are already very much engaged, but once there is a democratically elected government, I think our relationship will certainly move forward extremely well, and we're looking forward to that day.
Is there any other specific types of support besides with just the electoral, looking or observing and assessing the electoral process? What about after elections? Well,
after the elections, we're already talking to the government about how we can best use the development assistance, the money that we will be able to make available to Fiji after the elections have taken place. And I think that the focus perhaps should be on, say, sustainable rural livelihoods. We've already been providing a lot of support through NGOs to those in the sugar belt, working in the sugar industry, diversification and so on. We've been working with the Sugar Research Institute of Fiji, a lot of successful projects. And I think there's more we can do in that area, in sustainable rural livelihoods. And then we would also be offering support in governance areas, support for the parliament, support for various areas which are going to be important to develop once the elections have taken place. There are going to be lots of challenges, I think, in terms of governance.
Do you think is that where the bulk of the interest for EU is in revitalizing our sugar industry in the country, in Fiji?
Our interest coincides with what Fiji's interests are. Certainly we are not coming into Fiji and saying this is what we are going to provide you with. We will provide support in line with what the government's ambitions, what the government's strategies are in terms of development.
Well, 20 years already in the Pacific. What is the European Union looking towards now for the next, say, 20 years?
I think we are very much looking forward to establishing a closer relationship with the Pacific around strategic issues. I mentioned climate change, global security is another one. Conservation of the marine environment again is something that's important for us. And I would also like to see the European overseas countries and territories, in other words, New Caledonia, French Polynesia, Wallis and Futuna, and Pitcairn as well, although the population is very small of Pitcairn. Certainly I think there's a lot of opportunity for the Europe that is already present in the Pacific to work more closely with the other Pacific countries. I think we are already present with nearly, I think it's over half a million people, with European Union passports live in the Pacific. And I think there's more that we can do to bring together Europe and the Pacific in the mutual interests of both.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Jacobs. Unfortunately, time has caught up with us.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for joining us this evening on For the Record. For comments, you can send them to fortherecord@fbc.com.fj. And we look forward to having you join us again next week. Good night.